There's a small town in northern Washington state called New Halem. Now, I'm quite sure that the people of New Halem are perfectly normal, friendly people, yet at the same time there's something very unsettling about the place. The town is host primarily to employees of a nearby hydroelectric dam, so there are lots of buzzing power lines overhead, and many of the houses all look exactly the same. You never actually seem to meet any of the residents of New Halem, and the only people you encounter are other people like yourself who are simply passing through. This sometimes leads me to believe that the residents of New Halem have all been turned into zombies. Like New Halem, Ravenholm is also a, quote-unquote company town. Alex explained to us that Ravenholm was a former mining town that had been host to a number of refugees from City 17. Now, Ravenholm stands out sharply from every other location in Half-Life 2 simply because of its gloomy, oppressive atmosphere, which is really so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. The architecture of shed-like buildings and ever-present red brick and corrugated steel only add to this ambiance, and the narrow passageways throughout the town create a palpable sensation of claustrophobia. And now, of course, it is also nighttime, and this only makes it that much better. The town really is a seamless blend of science fiction and contemporary horror fiction in the finest tradition of those two genres. Like many of you, I'm sure I'm a fan of campy zombie movies, and just like me, I'm certain that your only complaint about Ravenholm is that it's far too short. When I was still young, my mother warned me against zombies. She said, don't speak to them. Now, actually, she may have been talking about strangers, but I think the advice is still rather appropriate, as zombies in general should be avoided. Now, I'm not a cryptozoologist, but I feel I know enough about zombies to safely say that there are two main families of these creatures. The first groups are the traditional voodoo zombies that have been created by supernatural means, and the second group are the zombies that have either been brought back to quote-unquote life, or have had their consciousness supplanted by biological means, and this could be everything from a virus, to gas from a meteorite, to former humans who are hosting a parasitic organism, as in the case of the zombies from Half-Life. The zombies in Half-Life 2 are really wonderful. They stumble about and shuffle and utter unintelligible cries and groans, and they really are everything you would expect from a person who has had an extraterrestrial creature take over control of their nervous system. There is much I'd like to know about the life cycle of the head crab. For instance, how does it reproduce? Does it lay eggs inside the host's brain? And how precisely does the head crab take control of the host body's nervous system? My guess is that after it latches onto the victim's head, it burrows through the skull with a sharp beak and then inserts some sort of protrusion into the brain in order to assume control of the body. It's ghastly stuff. I can see why the people hate head crabs so much. In Ravenholm, we discover for the first time that the Earth is now host to different species of head crabs, not just the type we encountered in the first Half-Life. They're the venomous black ones and the agile fast ones that really achieve a level of annoyance I did not think possible in a head crab. And of course, these other varieties of head crabs lead to their different types of zombie counterparts. I would also like to make the observation that the zombies in Half-Life 2, just like zombies in real life, are really keen on blue jeans and white t-shirts, and that also, like their real-world counterparts, they're extremely flammable, and they'll burst into flame for almost no reason at all.
Although they call me crazy, I care not, for thou art my helper, my strength, and my savior. May they become like dust before the wind. May the angel of the Lord pursue them. And what terrible wonders are these thou hast done among the dead? What shades rise to confess thee, and what spectres shall know thee by thy name? Turn not thy face away from me. Incline thy ear and hear me when I shall cry to thee in my affliction. Thy rages have come down upon me, and thy fears have agitated me. May the snare which they do not know come to them, and may the net which they have hidden for me catch them in my place. Take hold of a weapon and shield, and rise to help me. From the voice of my groaning, my bone has cleaved to my flesh.
When psychiatrists diagnose mental illnesses, they most often refer to a lengthy index called the DSM-4, or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. I've been poring over the documentation in an attempt to try and find a comfortable resting place for Father Grigory, and I think the closest I can come is chronic reactive psychosis. Now, this is not so much a mental disorder in itself, but rather a psychosis brought on by the experience of a severely traumatic or stressful event. Stedman's Medical Dictionary defines psychosis in part as characterized by derangement of personality and loss of contact with reality and causing the deterioration of normal social functioning. And I think you'll probably agree with me that Father Grigory falls right into this category. Consider what has happened to Father Grigory. He was obviously the parish priest at an Eastern Orthodox church in the small town of Ravenholm. The town became somewhat deserted during the Combine invasion, as it was probably then that the mining operations ceased. However, as the occupation began, the town became more and more a haven of refugees fleeing the horrid conditions of City 17. Grigory was probably the de facto leader, or at least the spiritual head of this group of people, about whom he probably genuinely cared a great deal. Eventually, the Combine realized that Ravenholm was an outpost of refugees and probably resistance members as well, and launched a series of head crab artillery barrages against the town. The people probably fought desperately but vainly against the onslaught, and unfortunately everyone eventually succumbed to zombieism. Father Grigory was the lone survivor of this event, and the stress of it was probably more than his kind heart could bear, and so his mind cracked a bit in a psychological defense. His mind fell back on the one thing that never let him down, his religious faith. In fact, his faith must be very strong, because if you take a good look at his hand, you'll notice that there's a cross branded on it. Youch. He seems to equate his people hosting head crabs with demonic possession. He still refers to the zombies as his congregation, and he fancies himself a sort of avenging angel, setting free the lost and tormented souls of his former charges, i.e. by killing them. Despite Grigory's little forgivable eccentricities, he certainly helps us out of a few jams, and certainly I've never seen anyone wield such a deadly double-barreled shotgun. His various booby traps are somewhat helpful, but far more entertaining and elaborate than was probably necessary, but as Grigory himself states, he has a large amount of time on his hands. In some ways, Grigory reminds me a bit of Colonel Kurtz from Apocalypse Now, and in fact he seems to bear, at least to me, a mild resemblance to Marlon Brando in that role. Ravenholm certainly reminds me of Kurtz's camp at the end of the river, with its proliferation of dead, decaying bodies lying around or hanging in various positions like it were a rummage sale of human corpses. The final showdown against the zombies in the graveyard is of course the climactic finale of your journey through Ravenholm. It really is all of the best stereotypes of zombie fiction put together in one place. It's night time, the moon is full, you're in a graveyard full of zombies, you're cutting the zombies in half with circular saw blades, there are explosions and fire, and you're in the company of a ranting priest with a shotgun. Really, what more could any of us possibly ask except to have this final battle be even longer? The best bit of all is Grigory's farewell to us after he lets us through the gate and he retreats into the small outbuilding while cackling with diabolical laughter. It really is a fitting end for a time spent in this accursed town, yet at the same time I'm always disappointed that I'm leaving Ravenholm, for it's like it's like a zombie holiday away from the drudgery of real life.